My uncle borrowed money from a neighbor once, and the neighbor, let's call him Ssemakula. Ssemakula was very generous. He gave my uncle the money, no argument, no long process. But then Ssemakula started coming around every week to give advice. He told my uncle which crops to plant, which ones to cut. He said the family was spending too much on school fees, and maybe the younger children could wait a year. He said my uncle's wife was managing the kitchen budget incorrectly, and perhaps Ssemakula's wife could help review it. My uncle, to his credit, was very polite about it for a long time. But eventually he said something I have never forgotten. He said, "Ssemakula, you lent me money. You didn't buy my house." I think about that story a lot when I think about the IMF. Today we're talking about the IMF loan, what it actually is, what it costs, and why the price is almost never just money. Let's start from the beginning, because most people have heard the letters IMF without anyone explaining what they actually stand for or what the institution actually does. The International Monetary Fund, founded in 1944, based in Washington, D.C., currently has 190 member countries. Its stated purpose to ensure the stability of the international monetary system, to help countries that are experiencing balance of payments problems, to lend money to governments that are running out of foreign currency and can't pay their international debts. On paper, that sounds fine, maybe even good. A country runs into trouble. The IMF lends it money. The country stabilizes. The world economy stays intact. That's the brochure version. Here's the part the brochure doesn't mention. The IMF doesn't lend you money and then leave. It lends you money and then tells you exactly how to run your country. These instructions are called conditionalities. And understanding conditionalities is understanding the whole story. Imagine you go to a money lender. You need 2 million shillings. The money lender says, "Fine, I'll give you the 2 million. But you have to fire 3 of your workers. You have to stop subsidizing your children's lunch. You have to sell the plot at the back of your house. You have to raise the rent on your tenants. And every 3 months, my people will come and check whether you are doing all of these things. If you are not, no more money." You'd look at that money lender and say, "Excuse me, I came for a loan, not a landlord." That is more or less how IMF conditionalities work. The formal name for the package of conditions is a Structural Adjustment Program, SAP. And the conditions inside ASAP tend to follow a very specific pattern, regardless of which country is borrowing, regardless of that country's history, its people, its specific problems, its climate, its economy. The prescription is almost always the same. Cut government spending, remove subsidies, privatize public companies, liberalize trade, devalue the currency, raise interest rates. This menu of policies became so standard, so consistent, that economists gave it a name, the Washington Consensus, because it reflected what Washington, the US Treasury, the IMF, and the World Bank, all based in the same city, believed every developing economy needed to do, whether they asked or not. Here's a story that makes this concrete. Zambia. Early 1990s, the country is in debt. It goes to the IMF. The IMF agrees to help. The conditions include removing subsidies on food and fuel, freezing public sector wages, cutting social spending, and eventually privatizing state companies, including the electricity provider. Now, Zambia's electricity provider served millions of poor households at subsidized rates. When the subsidies went, electricity tariffs rose. People who couldn't afford the new rates switched to charcoal, which accelerated deforestation, which worsened the climate situation, which affected agriculture, which increased food insecurity. One condition, a chain of consequences that the IMF report did not fully model, but Zambia was still required to comply or lose access to the money. Let me give you the number that I think about most when this topic comes up. From 1980 to 2004, the height of the structural adjustment era, Sub-Saharan Africa transferred $229 billion to the West in debt repayments. $229 billion. In the same period, the argument was that these loans and their conditions were helping Africa grow, were building economic stability, were ending poverty. The IMF said so directly. It did the opposite. And here's the part that is sometimes missed in these conversations. The IMF was created in 1944. Most African countries were not independent until the 1960s, which means African nations had no say in designing the institution they would later be forced to borrow from. Today, the 46 countries of Sub-Saharan Africa are represented by just 2 executive directors on the IMF board. 2 for 46 countries. Meanwhile, the United States alone holds about 17% of the voting share, which conveniently is just enough to veto any major decision it disagrees with. So we have an institution that African countries didn't design, have minimal power to influence, but must borrow from when their economies run into trouble. And the loan comes with instructions, written largely by people who have never governed an African country, never managed an African economy, and who will not feel the consequences of the instructions they give. Take Kenya in 2024. The government introduced a finance bill that included new taxes. The bill was a direct response to IMF loan conditions requiring Kenya to increase revenue. The Kenyan people, already dealing with rising food prices, rising fuel costs, rising everything, looked at the new tax proposals and said no. They didn't just complain online. They marched in Nairobi, Mombasa, Kisumu. Tens of thousands of people, young people mostly. Some of them entered parliament. The bill was withdrawn. But the IMF conditions that produced the bill, those remained. And this is the thing about debt. It is very patient. You can protest the finance bill today, but the debt doesn't care. It is still there tomorrow, and the month after, and the year after. Zambia's 2021 national budget allocated 39% of all government expenditure to debt servicing. 39%. Health and social spending combined got 25%. Think about what that means on the ground. A government spending more money paying back lenders than it spends on its own sick people. And those lenders are sitting in Washington. Look, I want to be honest about something. There are people who will tell you that IMF conditions for all their problems have sometimes worked. That Ghana's economy stabilized in the late 1980s partly because of structural adjustment. That some countries did grow. And that's not entirely wrong. Some economies did stabilize. Some growth did happen. The question is, at what cost and to whom? Because here's the pattern that appears again and again across country after country. The macroeconomic numbers improve. GDP goes up, inflation comes down, foreign investors feel confident. And simultaneously, school fees go up because the government cut the education subsidy. Hospital fees go up because the health budget was reduced. The price of a bag of maize goes up because the agricultural subsidy was removed. The economy, by certain measures, is performing better. The people in their daily lives are doing worse. In 1977, Egypt was told by the IMF to remove subsidies on bread and cooking oil, essential goods, things poor families depend on every day. The price of bread doubled overnight. Within days, riots broke out across the country. 79 people died. They were called the bread riots. President Sadat reversed the subsidy cuts within 48 hours. The IMF's response was, essentially, well, you need to eventually do it anyway. And honestly, that is the part that reveals the most. Not that the conditions are wrong, but that the institution, when its conditions cause people to die in the streets, looks at the situation and says the direction is still correct. Perhaps the pace was too fast. Adjust the speed, not the destination. So, the IMF loan, it is not a gift, it is not charity, it is not neutral, it is a loan with interest and conditions. And those conditions will tell you how to run your government, what to privatize, who to tax, what to cut. And if the conditions cause problems, and they often do, the people who wrote the conditions are not in your country. They are in Washington, in an office, preparing the next loan. This is not a conspiracy, it is a system. And systems are designed by people for purposes. Understanding that doesn't make you paranoid. It makes you informed. My uncle eventually paid Ssemakula back, every last coin. And the day he did, he told him something very politely. He said, "Ssemakula, thank you, but next time I need money, I'll find another way." The question for this continent is the same. Not whether we need money, we do. Development costs money. That's just reality. The question is whether the terms of borrowing can ever be renegotiated. Whether African countries can build enough economic solidarity to approach these institutions from a position of strength rather than desperation. Whether the next time the IMF arrives with its conditions, someone at the table has enough leverage to say, actually, let's talk about that clause. That conversation is starting to happen, slowly, but it's happening, and knowing what you're in is the first step to changing it. That's episode 4. I'm Tobias. Explain it like I'm from Uganda. New episode every Saturday. Share this with someone who thinks foreign aid and foreign loans are the same thing. They are not even close.